Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world and we talk to people who are making it happen and we get their stories. So today in the Sky Lounge, we have an IT crew panel. So welcome to the Sky Lounge, Ian, David, and Paul. How are y'all today?
Hey, Todd.
Ian, why don't you give us a little bit of background? Who are you and what are you working on?
Sure, great. Thanks, Todd. My name's Ian Findlay. I'm based in Boston. I'm a partner at TechCXO, and I help to run our fractional CIO practice. Most of the work that I get engaged with today is really in two buckets of activity. One is I am a fractional CIO for a number of different companies. And that just simply means I spend some time with each company, and that amount of time varies depending on how much time they need. So that's one bucket of activity. The second bucket of activity that I spend a fair amount of time is doing technology health assessments for companies. And that's really going in and doing a project that looks at their whole IT platform, whether it's systems, processes, external vendors, costs, and then gives them a report and says, are you doing well? Are there areas that you can improve? And then we talk through what those areas of remediation might look like.
Great. David, who are you and what are you working on?
My name is David Johnston. I'm based in Charlotte. I'm a principal on Ian's team. So I do most of the same things that he's mentioned. Right now, I'm working for one client that has me leading their application development work. Another client that we just wrapped up a technology assessment for, and another client where we finished helping them with their infrastructure. They had they were handling close to 0.5 petabyte of data a day, and obviously you can't do that on the cloud. So they've got an on-premise data center, and it needed some work.
Oh wow, cool. Paul, what are you working on these days?
Hi, I'm Paul King. Unlike these guys, I'm not as much in the core IT. I work with software development a lot. My background is been product development, building up software solutions for the last 30 plus years. And but I've gotten involved with cloud stuff a lot and DevOps, and so that's kind of led me to this discussion here, where I've seen a lot of ways to optimize costs and so on. The clients that I work with typically are either developing a product or, optimizing their cloud infrastructure. And so I get involved with all kinds of projects from that standpoint, and like working with a variety of clients that we can help them kind of get to the next level, if you will. So and I also do some technical due diligence projects as well, evaluating different companies and what their technology infrastructure looks like, both from the development and the cloud perspective as well. So
awesome.
Thanks.
Well, y'all are a great panel to bounce a couple of questions off of. Number one, I think first and foremost, everybody's got business cycle on the brain, so SVB kind of kicked it off, and we went into a bit of a retraction in tech. I think tech always sees it first. It's not been a great year for venture-backed companies or investment. People seem to be retrenching. We hear about a lot of layoffs, that kind of thing. What are you guys seeing in the clients that you serve, in the businesses that you're a part of, in terms of, how are people thinking about the business cycle right now? You want to take a crack at that one? Or what are you seeing in your businesses?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So being in the Boston area, I have a number of biotech clients that I work with, and biotechs have definitely been hit by that retraction in the investment environment. So we have seen. I've been working with one client that, as a function of having a difficulty raising cash, we've had to go through and significantly reduce the level of IT services that they have been receiving. So biotechs not to generalize, but like to have sort of a high standard of IT services. And in this case, this particular company basically couldn't afford it. So we ended up having to go through and really reduce almost line by line, what type of services they could get, whether that, for example, end user help desk services. We had to reduce the sort of quality of that help desk service in order to try and, with biotechs, they got to get to the next round. So sometimes sacrificing some quality of service in order to get to that next round where they could then maybe re-engage in some of those services. That's the goal. I think one of the interesting characteristics of, say, 3 of the last IT health assessments that I've been engaged in is just fundamentally a lack of awareness by the management team of where their IT costs go. And it seems like it's not until you have an economic retraction where the focus changes from thinking of IT as really basically a utility service where as long as it's working, they don't really pay much attention. And this may be a function of small businesses under 100 users, that size, they sort of let it continue. And it's not IT's not a skill area of the management team. They sort of feel like maybe they have an outsourced IT company. They may have an internal IT person, internal IT resource. They don't question the cost very much. So in the last 3 IT health assessments, we've uncovered just really, really significant cost waste that is a function of not paying attention to how much money they're spending, and also to how their business has changed and the fact that their IT spend maybe hasn't changed. That should be a flag. An example is a couple of examples. A biotech company that had 70 employees and was operating for a while. Their business retracted, and now they have 25 employees or thereabouts. They're spending $1,000 a month on telephony service. They have a telephone system in their office. It used to be used by a bunch of people. Now it's not used by a bunch of people, but the cost never changed. No one looked at it. And so when you add up the numbers and you look at the number of telephone calls they actually make now, not back when there were 70 employees, but now, they maybe average 3 to 5 telephone calls a day. So that means that each call costs them anywhere from $6 to $11 per call because their IT costs are fixed, which is an insane amount of money per call, just insane. And this has been going on for years. So if you tally up the amount of money they've wasted on their telephony services just by itself, it's many, many, many thousands of dollars. And that's for that company in a retraction mode. That's money they could have used for something else. Another example is this is a telco company, and they recently sold a portion of their business. Maybe about they sold off a company, and they sold off 30. With that sale, 30 employees left the company. Their MSP never removed the users that they had inside of that 30 users out of their Office 365 environment. So that's a huge security risk. That's a different discussion. But from a cost perspective, they're still paying the licensing and the cost for 30 users that haven't been with the company for quite some time. I mean, is it a lot of money? It's $600 a month. Does that make a difference? It certainly should. And these are small examples, but death by 1,000 cuts can be quite painful. So it's interesting that many times the operations of IT can go just sort of unnoticed, but meanwhile, there's a lot of opportunity for cost savings, and that's important in an era of retraction.
Ian, you said something a second ago about IT as a utility. Years ago, I had a CEO say, every company today is an IT company. we happen to be an IT company. This was a bank. He said, we happen to be an IT company that makes money moving money around. But every company today is an IT company. IT is a key differentiator. Technology in general has always been a differentiator going back 300 years. And to me, it seems that if you treat IT like a utility, you are giving up that advantage that IT can give you.
Yeah, I mean, David, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think you hit one of the nails on the head that you just hit is, but that differentiation doesn't come by magic, right? And it doesn't come by leadership from management teams that typically don't understand and value a lot of the ways in which IT can, or technology in general, can be a differentiator. So how does it happen? That differentiator happens with leadership. And many, at least in many of the companies that I work with, which are under, say, 500 employees, they lack that leadership. And so having at least a bit of leadership that understands how to leverage technology, how to enable it for a company, and how they can use it as a differentiator is really important. But that doesn't come from general senior management who aren't technologists. Does that make sense?
It does. I was thinking, though, about a client, for example, that I had recently. They have about $25 million worth of very expensive high-tech equipment. For those robots to function, they need a database. And the CEO was focused on buying another robot. And I went in and looked and said, okay, that sounds great, but your database that all of this runs on is running on a storage array that should have been shut down 5 years ago. And your head of IT is a very junior guy, and he's going out and buying used 9-gig hard drives to the tune of $500 a piece. Ian, what's $500 buy? Is it more than 9 gigs, would you say? So really failing to realize that yes, you've got a really cool technology, you need to invest in it, but you also need to invest in the fundamental technologies, the enabling technologies.
Well, but again, like your example right there, you need to invest in leadership as well. So leadership, in your very good example, one of the issues there is that the person making the IT decisions maybe wasn't making good decisions, right? The choice to buy a 9-gig hard drive. I have another client, another biotech, where they'd hired, it's a small company, and they had both an internal resource, an internal IT leader, and an MSP. Now, this company could barely afford either, much less both. Come to realize that internal resource really didn't have any IT leadership skills. In fact, in today's world, this IT leader was putting forth an IT budget which had something like $300,000 worth of new internal IT expenditure to buy new servers, new networking equipment, new storage arrays for a company that didn't need it. They should be up in the cloud. And they needed that $300,000 cash that they were going to spend on internal hardware that they just simply fundamentally didn't need. Why? Because the guy was sort of stuck in an old way of doing things. And that's not good leadership.
But yeah, there are pluses and minuses to the cloud and to to being on-prem, and you do need somebody who knows the difference. Paul, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about a client that I had that was also not really in a technology space. He was, it was a real estate company, but they were fundamentally dependent on, core IT services. And so again, Ian, you mentioned the leadership, the leader that they had was bringing in the cheapest resources they could from a personnel standpoint. So they were hiring their entire team almost was completely, new grads or people right out of a coding boot camp, and they didn't really have any senior leadership, and so they didn't know what they didn't know. And in a lot of cases, they were doing some things that were very risky for the business. Their main database was running on a single machine with no backup, and their whole business was totally dependent on that. So, had they lost their database, they would have been totally in a very bad situation. We'll just say, potentially a business altering event, and they had no idea how bad it was.
And I would imagine that the same is true. I mean, not just in core technology, but in that development phase where you have a team that doesn't really know what it's doing or doesn't have good execution leadership. There's direct monetary costs. There's also costs in time, where you waste time going down paths that are ineffectual. And again, that maybe comes to leadership who can steer away from that and move the ball down the road in as efficient a way as possible.
I know you guys, when we were talking before, had some really good stories about very specific things that people were cutting. Maybe let's take them in order of what are some of your favorite things to look at in terms of products that you can cut. What should people, if you're going to take a critical look at somebody's IT budget, what do you look for in terms of product spend? As low hanging fruit. What have you seen? Yeah, go ahead.
The first thing I look for is VMware. VMware was the solution for on-prem virtualization for a decade or more. But in the past year, they've been bought by a company whose MO has been to maximize short-term profits, their own short-term profits, at the expense of just about anything else. I've got a friend who said that at his company, they are looking at an increase of 18 times, not 18%, 18 times. And they've got 2 years left on their contract at the existing rate. And he has said, there's no way, even as a Fortune 500 company, they can afford an 18x increase in costs for that one utility. So they're going to be pushing over the next 2 years to get off of VMware. And I've got a couple of smaller clients that need to move off of VMware as well, but aren't really in a position to move to AWS or one of the other cloud providers. That company, for example, that I mentioned with the robots. All it takes is for some guy to back into a truck, and you've got $25 million worth of equipment that just sits there idle, or worse, goes haywire. So you've got to have stuff on premise to do to run it, but it can't be VMware. It's too expensive. So that's actually one of the first places I look.
So what do you do instead of VMware? I mean, that's kind of been a long-term gold standard. Is there an alternative? Or
Citrix has a solution called Zen, and there's a company out of France, Vates Tech, that has been building on top of Zen. They've got a solution that's for very cost-effective for small companies. It's a little bit iffy if you're talking a Fortune 50 company, but if you've got anywhere between 3 physical servers and 50 physical servers running virtual machines, it's a good solution. It works really well, and it's as close as you get to a drop-in replacement. There are a couple of other solutions, Microsoft's hypervisor, but the problem there is it's not a drop-in replacement. You need to rethink the way you do certain things, and you need to bring in new skills.
Yeah. Well, right behind me here is a Proxmox cluster.
Yeah.
Oh man, you are a nerd.
That's true. I can't deny it. But my point being, there's another example of a company that was unknown, say, 3 to 4 years ago, Proxmox, and has made a huge dent in this market, primarily as a function of this sort of craziness that's happened with the standby, which is VMware. And Proxmox made some good business decisions in offering an open source version of their platform, and then a commercialized version as well.
Oh, neat. So you don't have to choose between, a total platform rewrite to get to, I don't know, the cloud or something. Sometimes there's vanilla, cheaper versions that people have come in and can offer to you in the market. Paul, you do some interesting work too with cost reduction on the software side. Everybody's got a huge Amazon budget that seems to always go up and to the right in terms of spend.
Yeah.
What do you what are your favorite ways? When you look at, like, you come into a new project, especially software, where there's bloat everywhere, people have kind of gone too fast and spent too much money. What do you like to look at in terms of low hanging fruit? Up at AWS.
Yeah, so I do get involved with a lot of cloud solutions like that, and typically it's AWS. Of course, there's other cloud providers, and occasionally it's Azure or GCP. But a lot of times with AWS, people, the whole cloud world is really cool, really easy to spin things up. Things that used to take us weeks or months to get servers set up, you can spin up in 5 minutes, and that's a great thing. The counter side to that is you can spin up a lot of expense very quickly, and you can leave things running that you don't need, and you can spin up all kinds of machines that are overpowered for the job at hand. So what I like to do is I go in and look at the bill. I look at the AWS spend. I see the breakdown. Amazon's got a good, a good way of slicing it to where you can see exactly where the money's going, what services are being used. So I go in and look for all kinds of waste. I'm working with a client now that I went in there. They were spending $60K a month for their AWS solution. They're running about 400 different EC2 instances. And when I started looking at a lot of those, it seemed like the average CPU load was about 5%. So they're paying for 100% CPU and they're using 5%. Now, granted, we can't run things at 100%, but there is a balance there. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And so they kind of were going with microservices for everything. And so they would have, for redundancy, they would have 2 different instances of each microservice, but each one is running it on its own box, and it's just not being utilized that much. And so we're moving them to Kubernetes to be able to make better use of those resources. So we're still in the middle of that, so I don't have the end result, but I do believe that we'll at least be able to cut out 50% of that. So if you save a company $30K a month on their cloud spend, it's huge, right? A lot of other companies that I go in and look at, like I said, they may have multiple instances of things that they need some redundancy, but they've got too much, or what's also very common is they're running 16 CPUs when they need 8, or they need 4 CPUs, or like one that came to mind, they had a series of servers and each of them had 8 terabytes of disk space, but they were only using 2 and 3 terabytes. So they're just spending for all this empty disk space that they're never going to use. They want to have headroom, and you got to have some free space, but you can expand it as you need it. But their usage was very flat. They weren't growing in their usage of the disk space, but so they didn't really need a lot of headroom. And yet they've got, they're literally just throwing away several $1,000s a year on disks that's just sitting empty. So sometimes it's fine tuning things like that. I mentioned going to Kubernetes. With Kubernetes, one of the things is you've got the redundancy, and if a service drops out, you've got the redundancy built in. So that actually, in addition to making better use of the resources, you can also then convert to using spot instances from AWS, which is actually, and sometimes it's a half to even, maybe a third of the cost of the standard resources. And the one drawback to it is that AWS could reclaim that resource at some point. But if they do, then you just spin up another one, right? So with that built-in redundancy, it's not consequential if a rare event happens and AWS takes away one of your instances, then Kubernetes will just spin up another one. And so by doing that, you can actually cut your spend considerably that way as well. So for this one client that I mentioned, it's possible we might get them down to a quarter of what they were spending by doing just those two things. And there's a number of other things, but I won't go into every detail there. But there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Going serverless, for example, and other methods to reduce the spend.
It's so interesting because I think that what you were saying just at the beginning, Paul, where something that used to take us a week or 2 weeks or a couple of days anyway to add technology service, spin up a server, now takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it may take, and the easy path, the easy button to adding services has led to this proliferation that hasn't had a lot of thought given to it as the easy button has been hit over and over and over and over again. And so you see this sort of, especially if many companies are sort of self-managing their AWS environment or their Azure environment, GCP. And so this proliferation and this sprawl happens. And that part is fairly obvious. And there's the other part, which is not really giving thought to, for example, data storage. You mentioned that these oversized disks, but just raw data storage with companies using EFS as a primary file storage area. But so all of a sudden you have terabytes of data. I think about, again, lots of biotech companies, and they need to store lots of data for a long period of time. And I have clients that would take in and stuff these outputs from the scientific instruments into EFS volumes, which are very expensive. And once they looked at it once, they were never touched again. And so who's watching that process and saying, you know what, I think we need to change the process flow of how you're working with your data so that maybe the first target area for this data is EFS. That makes lots of sense. But we need a process to then move it over to a different platform like S3, and then move it from S3 to lower cost S3 and et cetera, so that you manage your costs. Otherwise, it's especially if the data volume keeps going up and up and up and up, you have this enormous data storage bill. So yeah, interesting.
You were talking about that before, Ian, at some point, where people treat IT kind of like the literal IT closet. you cram all this stuff in there, and then you shut the door, and it gathers dust and spider webs, and nobody's real sure who has the key anymore. What's best practices, or what would you recommend? Somebody says, man, we don't ever want to get in this position where we're beholden to some 5-year-old hard drive not failing. What do you tell people? What do you guys all? How do you think about what's a good cadence, or what's some simple controls people can put into place so that IT gets refreshed on a timely basis?
For me, it's what we at one of my prior employers called IT governance. You have a structure in place. You have a cadence that says that this particular decision gets revisited every 18 months. This other decision gets revisited every year. this decision gets revisited once a quarter. Nothing goes more than 24 months before somebody at least revisits that decision. And there's set policies for what you do and don't allow. The more you're having to manage, the more you need to put it in baskets that you can carry around and deal with when it's time to deal with it, and ignore it the rest of the time. Otherwise, you're too busy. There are too many things that need attention. But if you say, for example, starting in January, we're going to be reviewing that decision that, where the 18-month cycle for our hardware is up for review. So the hardware team is going to be busy for the next 6 months deciding what our next hardware platform is going to be and setting up a bake-off to test the 3 options that they're going to pick from, and then put a budget together for the final solution on that. And that's what the team's going to be doing this year. Next year, they're going to be working on something completely different. But what your resources are, what your people are going to be focused on. You know where the money's going to be focused. And you've got a playbook that will remind you, at the first of the month, this month, next month we're going to have to deal with such and such. So that you don't have someone coming in with their hair on fire saying, to use your phrase, Todd, that 5-year-old storage array that we said we were going to deal with next year? Well, it just burned up and we've lost our primary database, and we're going to be running around with our hair on fire for 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all true. I think just putting on the small business hat, right? Some of the processes are pretty simplistic, right? But frequently not done. But a main one is there's got to be at least an annual, if not a biannual, review of what are so there's costs and how do we mitigate failure. But on a cost side, at least an annual review with whoever's running IT. Then maybe that's an MSP, a third-party IT provider. Maybe it's an internal IT person. But a line-by-line budget item review that says, what is this? Why do we need it? Is there a less expensive version of that that's of equal or similar quality or better quality? And just pay attention to it, which I think many business leaders don't. And I think that's an issue. How do you keep your systems refreshed? But it's sort of the same thing. It's looking at your IT infrastructure and understanding what the age is. Do you have an established process to age out the equipment and replace it? Putting in as part of your budgeting cycle. I mean, it seems fairly simplistic and straightforward, but also frequently not done. Not done to say, well, we need to have a budget that says for 30% of our laptop fleet, we need to anticipate replacing 30% or 15% or 20%, pick a number. But we need to have that in our IT budget annually. Otherwise, you're just sticking your head in the sand and ignoring what is potentially an issue.
Mechanically, how do you guys track that? Is it like just comes off the spreadsheet and it flows downhill from the budget and you just go line item by line item on the budget? Should we like track vendors in a more sophisticated way? When the vendor renewal comes up every year or every month or quarter or whatever it is on the payment cycle. If you had to if you had your own company and you're starting from scratch, what would you put into place initially to track these things or to tickle that cycle?
I'd start with, at a bare minimum, a list of the IT assets that are important to the business. Okay. So, for example, if you've got a web page, and every company today does, the web page is an asset. So is the system that the web page is running on. The email server, the email server itself is an asset. The system that stores those emails over time is an asset, and you need that list of what is it I actually have to maintain. I've got one client that has a fleet of trucks, and they have a fleet management system that they use that tells them Bob's truck needs to have the oil changed in the next month. Tom's truck needs to have the oil changed the month after. And they're tracking that. They took that same system and they threw all their IT stuff in there. And it was not the solution I would have picked. It wasn't one I'd ever seen before, but I thought it was really clever and it was exactly what they needed.
No, I mean, in some respects, again, for small companies, I think a spreadsheet's a perfectly fine place to start. List all the IT-related services, put a budget against them, and then along with your systems. But then the trick is to make sure that you're marrying that up with what you're actually paying on a monthly basis, because there's a difference between maybe what you contracted for in January and in November. What you're actually paying for may be very different, and understanding why is that? Is there something that I missed that it leads to an increase in cost? Is there a justification for that? So making sure that there's that connection between what you believe you're paying, what you budgeted, and what you're actually paying, and look at that, every 6 months, every 12 months, so that you're solid staying on top of it.
So on your birthday, when you renew your driver's license and your car tag and your...
Well, let's not make your birthday completely bad by looking at IT budgets. I mean, come on.
So, Paul, AWS, is there an analog to this? I know they have a lot of good tools.
I was just going to say, like, going to the cloud is a big savings if you do it well. So, if people have on-prem solutions, I think moving to the cloud is a big plus. I mean, it's really hard for a small company to be able to run an IT shop that would be comparable to an AWS as far as the redundancy, the security, and reliability of it. So, but again, going back to what we said before, hitting that easy button can be costly. So I think the same thing applies that Ian and David were talking about is you can't just do a one-time review of the bill. You can't do a one-time review of your solution. You've got to, revisit that and keep coming back and looking at what you have, how it's set up, and how can you optimize it. You want to have that redundancy built in, at least for software solutions, which is, again, the angle I'm coming at this from a lot of times is, you've got to have redundancy and security, but you can do it in an intelligent way. I mean, I deal with a lot of development teams, for example. Maybe they're not working 40 hours a week, maybe it's 50 hours a week. But if everybody's kind of on the same time frame, the same location, you've got a window of 50 or 60 hours a week that the systems are being used. But yet most companies have them running 168 hours a week because they don't think about shutting them off. And with the cloud, you pay for what you use. So if you're paying 3 times as much as you need to just by running it while everybody's asleep. And for your development environments, you don't really need to do that. I mean, a production environment, sure, but for all of your lower environments, your development, your QA, all your test environments, and there's no reason to run it when people aren't using it. So you can kind of spin it up as needed and then take it back down and save a lot of money that way. Also, performance testing is another area that they'll build a performance environment to do their testing with, but they run a performance test every so often and they leave it running the rest of the time, right? So if you can spin it up when you need it, take it down when you don't, then you can optimize those costs. So I think, again, those are things that you can review, ways to improve your overall cloud spend that way. So, but it is a constant thing to go back and revisit every so often. What do we need to do? How can we, how is this particular service grown, or maybe we need to adjust the amount of resources here or there, but, so it's not ever static. You do have to review it from time to time to keep that in line.
I want to talk about maybe a different angle for cost cutting, since it's on everybody's brain, but people, there's certainly, good and bad ways to do this. Clawing back, telephone hours, just renegotiating a contract is great. I mean, nobody gets hurt, but ultimately at some point you have to, downsize or, mix up the skill set a little bit and realign. Have you guys seen this done well or poorly in the last year or so? You got any stories to tell around the people side of attempting cost cutting measures?
I've seen it both ways. I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done really, really badly.
What maybe talk about the spectacular failures? What's the risk that can happen if you're not careful?
I want to avoid giving anything away that'll make it clear who I'm talking about. But I've got one client that, or I had, past tense, I had one client that cut almost their entire IT staff. They outsourced it to an MSP, and the MSP didn't really do all that great a job. The other problem with it was that the MSP's solution was just buy new hardware.
Okay.
So their solution was everybody's going to run Windows 11. And all of the machines are running Windows 10. Windows 11 gets you, Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 6 weeks of additional support. So there's not a real big gain going from 10 to 11, but you do have to have a TPM. You do have to have twice as much RAM and a faster CPU. So all of the equipment that they had, most of which was less than 2 years old, they had to cut. They had to replace. And so this MSP was being very tactical, very focused on we want to have the most secure system, but not really being practical about it. And because of the decisions that the MSP was making and the fact that the CEO didn't really pay attention to it, they wound up having to cut the staff that were actually bringing in money because they'd spent all this money and they didn't have the cash. And the client, I think, is going to be struggling for quite some time to recover from that.
Why?
Yeah.
Then I've got another client that actually did it really well. They saw that they were going to have to cut some of their IT staff, and the CEO made personal calls to companies in the area that needed those kinds of people, and basically walked into the meeting saying, I need to cut 5 people. I'm really sorry, but I do have 5 new jobs lined up at 4 of the companies in the area. And I want to get y'all interviewed out there. And they all walked out the door one day on a Friday, and on Monday they started new jobs. So you can do it right.
Yeah, I think David and I both worked on a project relatively recently. This is a highly specialized industry, and the parent organization was basically a private equity firm that rolled up a number of different companies inside of this industry across the United States and Canada. And one of the things that they did in the cost-cutting measure was to basically decimate the technical staff, IT operations, networking, security, server management, database management, as well as the software development team and project management team. And that was a wonderful cost-cutting measure because it saved them quite a lot of money. But one of the interesting problems that it ended up leaving them with is that those staff members were not an issue within the company. Maybe they added some cost to the company, but the real issue with the company was the leadership of those departments. And because they decimated the staff, they were stuck with the leadership, who was actually a problem in running the company, because those leaders were the only people left who knew anything about how the business ran. And it's a complicated business, very technical. And so they sort of shot themselves in the foot in being able to recreate the management team of the company, because they got rid of everyone else who knew anything about how the business ran. And so they were kind of stuck with the people who they actually really didn't want to have. It's sort of an interesting conundrum.
Nobody to step up behind that.
Correct. No one who could take over the reins because they gotten rid of all those people. They were gone.
Wow. So it's almost like a hostage situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it done lots of different ways over the years. I've led software teams at 10 different companies at least. And so, there's been ups and downs over the years for sure. And certainly you have to do riffs at times. But I also go into companies a lot of times and evaluate the team and find that there are people there that shouldn't have been there the last 5 years. They've actually produced very little of anything. So, there's a balance there. I mean, sometimes you look at that and you go into a place and somebody's just somehow they're hiding in the recesses of the company, and they keep, somehow sticking around because they've been there for 5 years or 10 years, but nobody really has challenged them to see, can they really do the job? And in many cases, I remember one interview, when I went in as a VP of development at this company and I started interviewing all the people, one guy was just playing games all day and he really wasn't producing anything. And so needless to say, he didn't stick around for long. On the flip side, I've seen so many people go towards, okay, we can save money by offshoring. So we're going to cut the staff and then go offshore for everything. And, there's a time and place for those types of things. But many times they just look at, okay, I'm paying X dollars for this person and I can cut it to Y and save money, but they're ignoring the domain expertise that this other person has been in the company for 20 years. I've seen entire software products almost decimated by doing that because they cut all but the best people, and then they put those best people as, instead of, they were the best developers, and now they're like, okay, you can't develop. You're just a liaison to a team of people that, this offshore team that's going to do the development work. And they didn't like that job because that's not what they signed up for. They want to be a developer. And so then they left, and now the company's left with no expertise of their product. And they've got a lot of people who are, hands on a keyboard that can code, but they don't really know the product, and they don't know the business logic. They don't know the domain, and that can be very devastating as well. So, I mean, I think there's got to be a balance of, not letting people just loaf and do nothing, and make sure that you have a high expectation of your people. But on the other hand, value those people and value their expertise that they have, and don't just disregard that and say, I can find somebody cheaper, because many times you get what you pay for in that sense, and you lose a lot of core knowledge that you can't easily regain.
Yeah. Anybody got any good AWS stories about, cost overruns? David, you were telling us one that was kind of interesting. You want to tell that story about the cost overrun nightmare?
Sure. I have a friend who teaches a class at the local university in Charlotte. And a few years ago, it was a class on how to use AWS. AWS had given him a budget, fixed budget for teaching the class. And one of the students checked the keys to the AWS account into GitHub, into a public repo, late at night. And his phone started blowing up. There were accounts, or rather massive Bitcoin miners running in Brazil and in Saudi Arabia and Singapore and in China, all of these places. And all of the work that they'd been doing was in the U.S. East, because that's where we're located. And he said the first time he shut one down, all of a sudden, there were 10,000 more. He said when they took the thing apart, it was the most beautiful bit of orchestration and resiliency that he had ever seen. He said this was military grade resiliency. You shut down one admin account and it triggers creating 10,000 new admin accounts. Every time you do it, it's like cutting the head off of a hydra, except that instead of cutting off one and you're getting two heads back, you cut off one head and you get 10,000. And he said they just had to abandon the whole class.
It seems like good teaching material for the class.
It was good material.
Lesson number 1, AWS can run away with cloud formation scripts.
Totally.
All right. What a great story. So we've all kind of been through a few of these business cycles and have, know that down is not forever and up is not forever, so given that, the cycle is a little bit on the depressed side in that, there's sooner rather than later, there's going to be an uptick. How should people be thinking about, when do you turn on the faucet for hiring, and then when do you put on the gas, in these business cycles? Are you guys seeing that happen yet? What do we look for in the business cycle? So when, right now is a great time to pick up really talented people. If you're hiring, you can really get ahead of the curve. Is now a good time to hire? When do you hire? Which roles are you hiring for? What are you guys seeing out there in the world? Or when do you think the tide's going to turn? Or has it turned already?
I was thinking about that while you were asking the question, and I've got a couple of clients that I think are cutting excessively. To Paul's point, they're not just cutting the guy playing video games; they're cutting the lead developers, and a lot of times they're cutting the people who are the most expensive because they're trying to save money. And we let this one guy go instead of letting these other two people go. The problem is he's the one with all the domain expertise. Thinking about the client that Ian was talking about, that's now stuck with leadership that is not really up to the task.
I'm not sure I've really seen.
But
sorry.
I thought well, what I was going to say was I've also got a client right now that has just decided to make a major investment in their platform. They think now is the time, and so I think it's possible that the tide is, if it hasn't turned, it is at least slowing down and is about to turn. And I think we're going to see a big bump in IT over the next couple of years. I saw yesterday, or was it yesterday, that NVIDIA alone added the equivalent of the value of Bank of America to the stock market in one day.
Oh, God. That's crazy.
It was way down low 2 days ago. And yesterday, somebody mentioned that Elon Musk was building the AI training farm with, what is it? Thousands and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA chips. And their stock just exploded. So I think the market, I think not the market, but the industry as a whole is poised to move in the right direction, to start moving back up. And I think that the companies that wait too long to do something are going to regret it.
Ian, Paul, you guys got any
counter argument?
Wise insights, having surfed the waves of the economic cycle a couple times? What would you be doing right now? It's a very confusing time. It's easy to kind of make a wrong move, and it's really easy to sit and hold your breath for a minute. Is that really the right thing to be doing? Or, when, what would move you off the dime to start sticking your head out and, hire a little bit?
What do you think?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to work with companies that have been kind of growing through all of this. So, a lot of the downturn that I hear about, I haven't experienced that much recently. Clearly I've over the years I have But recently, the clients I'm working with, and I think this is true even in most downturns, is companies that are well run and have a good product, a good direction. They take advantage of those cycles. When people are available, they can hire good people, and just you don't let the pendulum swing crazy either way, right? I mean, a lot of the layoffs that we hear about are because people just ramped up and hired like crazy, and then they go and have to cut like crazy. And so, if you're methodical about it and you go, you make sure that when you hire somebody, you've got the resources to cover it, but you hire strategically, then you can get some good people at these times where a lot of talent is on the market. And I think that's a great time to hire if you're not going crazy with it. And so I'm seeing solid gradual growth with the companies that I'm working with, and so from that standpoint, I think they're doing well. So I would say, if you've got the right business model, you've got the right plan, and you're thinking through it wisely, then you're always looking for adding the right people to your company.
Yeah, I agree with everything. My only 2 cents is I'm not sure I've seen the bottom of the nervousness from an investment perspective. I think many of the clients that I've been working with are still on the sidelines. Maybe they're starting to think about it, but from expanding an IT staff perspective, they're still much more focused on the existing budget than expanding it.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like leadership is an advantage, and if it's lacking, it can hurt you badly. Planning cycles are crucial, and the tighter you can plan and execute, the more you're going to be able to navigate through these turbulent waters in a steady way. Does that about sum it up?
Makes sense to me.
I think so.
Okay.
There was mention of NVIDIA. Funny story is that NVIDIA was one of my customers when they were a 3-person company. And I remember meeting with them to try and figure out how we could provide services to them, building their device drivers for their new graphics card when they couldn't really afford to pay us just yet, And so we were negotiating payment terms, and yet, here they are, $3 trillion company. And too bad I didn't get in the door with them at that time. I probably wouldn't be on the call with you guys today, but unfortunately, I wasn't wise enough to tap in and get a piece of that. So,
well, you never know.
Cool.
Well, it's all about travel and getting out there in the world and experiencing life and seeing people. You guys got any fun travel stories you want to share? I know you guys have been around the world and done some crazy things. David, you want to go first? You got a cool travel story you want to share with us?
Sure. Years ago, I was living in Barcelona and was flying back to Atlanta. The plane had a scheduled layover in Madrid for about an hour. We landed in Madrid, and on the way in, the pilot got on the intercom and said, "We've got a little minor mechanical thing, nothing to worry about, but we're going to put you up in a hotel tonight. When we land, we're going to ask you to get off the plane as quickly as possible and get on the buses that are there, and we will bring you your luggage back at the airport. Leave your check-in, your carry-ons as well. Just go ahead and hop on the bus. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine." And we land, and the pilot leaves us parked at the end of the runway. And I look out the window, and we're surrounded by soldiers with machine guns and dogs that are crawling up into the wheel wells and sniffing. And I think, I know what this is about. And the lady next to me says, "Oh my God." And I just kind of reach over and squeeze her on the shoulder gently and say, saying that word isn't going to help. We got off the airplane, and I didn't know airport buses could go that fast, but we were zipping down the runway faster than the airplanes. Wow. The driver of that bus did not want to be near that airplane.
Wow. Holy smokes.
And they put us up, Delta put us up in a really nice hotel, gave us a shuttle ride back to the airport. We got back on the plane, and flew on to Atlanta the next day. Everything was fine.
Wow.
Well, hopefully you don't
Ian,
experience that again.
No, I don't think so.
Jeez.
Ian, you got anything good you want to share?
Well, it's not really, I mean, it's sort of a travel story. It's more of a geeky travel story. So my wife and I, this is a few years ago, were climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and I owned my own business at the time, as a technology business. And we also had kids. So I brought with me a sat phone. So there's the technology piece. And we're maybe 3/4 of the way up Mount Kilimanjaro. And somehow I received a message on my cell phone. It's very occasionally you'd hit these weird sort of pockets of cell service, which is odd. And it was a sort of an urgent message from my largest client at the time, by far. And here I am at, I don't know, 17, 18,000 feet. And, you do what you have to do for business, and you're traveling and you're out of contact. And I picked up the sat phone and went over to a private space and called this guy on the side of Kilimanjaro and said, listen, how urgent is this? Of course, I'm willing to help, but we have a whole team there. Do you really need me, or can someone else help you? So kind of funny, technology is great. Sometimes it does make it so that even when you don't want to be reached on the side of a very large mountain, you're available. But that's also how you conduct business as well.
Paul, you got anything good you want to share?
Well, I guess the story comes to mind is really early on in my career when I really just got started my first international trip. I was going to Brussels, Belgium for a conference, and I lived in Birmingham, Alabama at the time. So you couldn't get many flights out of Birmingham, so I had to drive to Atlanta to get a flight. So I start my journey there. It's a 3-hour drive or so to the airport. Then I get on the plane and I head to Europe, and we get to the UK, and basically we had I had a long layover as it was to get to this 1-hour flight from London to Brussels, and as it got closer to my flight time, it showed delayed, and then it showed canceled, and the next flight was canceled. And so it took forever to get out of there. It was because they were having some kind of an air traffic control strike in Belgium at the time. And so they kept opening and closing the airspace, evidently. And so eventually we get on a plane, and we're waiting for one other passenger, and they don't show up. And so we can't leave because of the controlled airspace, the controlled area that they had us in. And so it was a security concern. So we couldn't leave, but we couldn't get off the plane. So we're sitting on the plane for like 3 hours with no AC. And then eventually we take off, and they're like, okay, I think we can make it this time. And so we get up there, and then they close the airspace again. So then they divert us to the Netherlands, and then we have to get a bus, and then they drive us back to the airport at Brussels. And then I had this bright idea, because I was, it was a company trip. I was wanting to save the company money. There was 2 ways to get to my hotel. I could spend $30 for a cab or $2 for a train ride. So I take the train ride to save them some money. And of course, the train doesn't stop where I need it to stop. So I have to get off at the next closest spot. And so then I've got all this luggage that I'm carrying, and by this time it's like midnight local time, and I have to travel down, and I have to carry all this stuff several blocks to the hotel. And then I get to the hotel, and then of course they don't have my reservation. So it just, it was a nightmare of a trip. And so it was like 40 hours from the time I left my house to the time I actually got to the hotel, and I still had no room. And they were fully booked, of course. So that's enough about the story. I could go on, but it was not the best, first international trip for me.
Good thing is that you were young at the time, so you could roll with it more easily.
Yeah, I could definitely roll with it a little better then. I think I was 23 or 24 at the time.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you guys here on the show. And if people want to follow up with you after this, what's a great way for them to get in touch with you on the internet? David, you want to go first?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me under TechCXO.
Yeah, I would say the TechCXO website, we have contact information there. And LinkedIn is of course good.
Yeah.
Same for you, Paul.
Yep. Same.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's been great having you guys, and bye for now.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.